A completely meshed covered front panel of a chassis. Haven't seen that in a while, but it can be done. Hello guys, Matthew here and welcome back again to my channel. Another day, another build, or better yet, an in-depth look of the chassis. And for this time I have this very interesting SilentiumPC Regnum RG6V Evo TG ARGB model. That's a bit of a mouthful, but let's just jump right into it. What can I say about its looks? Well, for starters, the first thing that pops right out is this big mesh front panel, which nowadays became a really rare sight, as most of the modern day chassis solutions have a closed-off design on the front, which in most of the cases takes a toll on their capability to push cold air from the outside and overall have a good airflow potential, so I'm really liking the fact that SilentiumPC decided to make a model which takes this approach. To pull it off, you will need to apply a bit more force than usual, I would say uncomfortably more, which makes you feel like you're going to break something off. Thankfully that didn't happen and I pulled it off multiple times. On the other side of it we have some kind of dust filter, but unfortunately it's not removable. Behind it we have three pre-installed 120mm translucent-like looking RGB fans, together with one on the back, so that's a total of 4 of their Stella HP ARGB 120mm fans. You also have an option to choose a version of this particular chassis model which, instead of these fans, has non-RGB ones, which lowers down the price of the chassis by around 20%. The fans unfortunately are not PWM controlled, although on their website they only have a PWM version of this particular fan model, but it's possible that they made a non-PWM version for this chassis. They do support addressable RGB control, which is why they have another cable coming out of them. Since this is a lot of cables to connect, the Regnum RG6V comes with a hub that can round up to 5 fans and 5 addressable RGB connections, so you just need to connect that hub to the motherboard, which makes the whole thing a bit more practical. You have an option to control their lighting in a toggle colorway directly over the chassis, and for that you have this small adapter in case you don't have any addressable RGB headers on the motherboard. As for the fans themselves, in terms of their specifications, they run from 800 to 2300 RPM. You will hear a bit later what kind of noise they make together with the rest of the components. While their RGB lighting is pretty subtle, it's not that in your face. It can look somewhat dimmed on the front when you're a bit off axis, although I was very pleased on how they evenly look when they lit up. Back to the chassis itself, I overall do like how it looks. It's not super unique, but it is appealing. They went for that more or less minimalistic approach, while the tempered glass side panel, though a common theme, does give it that extra something. It's held by 4 thumb screws in each corner, and around those edges it's completely blacked out, while it's also slightly tinted. It comes off easily, although it's a bit tricky to put it back on since the fitting is quite tight on these rubber dampers, plus they can occasionally fall off, so you have to be somewhat careful. On the top front of the chassis you'll find your usual set of switches and ports, in particular power on, reset, RGB LED lighting toggle switch, LED indicator, 3.5mm audio in and audio out jacks, and 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports. Coming to the main compartment, I was greeted with plenty of space to do a standard build in it. Although it's a shorter chassis format, it can still accommodate basically anything, with a standard power supply shroud separation in the bottom part. They've also went for a lot of pass-through holes with rubber grommets. We have them on the top and the right side, and I especially like this one in the middle of the top side of the power supply shroud for running the PCI Express power cables to the graphics card, and how they made a wide but just deep enough cut on the bottom edge of the motherboard tray for all those front panel, fan and other connections. As for what can be fit inside it, you can put up to 162mm tall CPU coolers and 360mm long graphics cards in case you don't have anything installed in this front area, while if you do decide to put a radiator on the front in a push-pull configuration, you can put around 300mm long graphics card. Speaking of radiators, as you can see, here I have a 360mm one coming from Fractal's new Celsius Plus Prisma series of all-in-one water coolers. It fit in like a glove, and you have just enough space in this bottom cutout portion of the power supply shroud for another set of 3 fans for a push-pull setup. Besides on the front, on the top side, which has this honeycomb mesh pattern and its own magnetic dust filter, you can put up to 280mm long radiators and anything else below that in terms of fan and radiator configuration. Feel free to check out my review of this Fractal's all-in-one water cooler. I will put a link to it in the right top corner of this video. I've actually done a combo review on that because I've also checked out its smaller 240mm brother, so I have a direct comparison between these two models. Moving to the other side of the motherboard tray, in the bottom compartment behind the power supply shroud, we have a spot for, well, a power supply on the back. Unfortunately, they didn't put any padding for it. It only has this raised up portion, while the rest of that compartment is completely clutter free, so here you can tuck in any excess power or other cables. On the other side of that bottom surface we have another big magnetic dust filter, as well as 4 raised up feet with soft padding on them. You are probably wondering where should you put the 3.5-inch drives, but don't worry, there's a place for them, 2 spots in particular. Using rubber grommets and screws you can put one on the bottom, while the other one hangs upside down over it and latches onto that top mesh surface of the power supply shroud. In that same place you can also choose to put 2.5-inch drives or a mixed combination of them, while you can also put 2 additional 2.5-inch drives on the left side of the motherboard tray. Due to that, there's plenty of space between it and the right side panel of the chassis, so you can go all in on the cable management. As you've probably noticed, they will provide you with few velcro ties and a couple of zip ties, alongside of plenty of cable tie points on the back, which was appreciated greatly in this particular case, since you have a bunch of cables coming in from the fans. Plus, in my case, I don't use any classical drives, as I have an M.2 SSD for this configuration, so the cable situation would be even worse to handle. There's a cool detail on the back of the chassis in a form of these ventilation holes, which will somewhat help in moving the air through that back compartment, probably making the SSDs a bit cooler, while the 7 expansion slots have their own clamp down bracket for staying extra put and to look a bit nicer. Taking a look at the temperatures, I was pretty satisfied with what I saw here, around 80 degrees Celsius of low CPU temperature for my Ryzen 7 3700X, using motherboard's default fan profile, and couple of degrees below that if you run the fans at full blast. The RX 5600 XT GPU wasn't getting too hot either, just below 70 degrees Celsius, which was around 4 degrees Celsius higher compared to my open bed testing of it, but what's interesting is that its fans were running a bit slower here. Again, when the chassis fans were running at full speed, I saw GPU's fan speed drop to around 1300 RPM while keeping the same temperatures. Overall, the CPU temperatures were a bit higher compared to the original Fractal's fans, which come with this all-in-one water cooler. I've actually used the same chassis for my review of it. Of course, in that case I didn't use the chassis stock fans, as I did now for its review, but that's to be expected since Fractal's ones are more static pressure optimized. Last but not the least, here's a short sound clip of the whole system during idle, load and full fan speed, while also showing you the sound meter for a measurement comparison. The price tag of a bit above 50 euros for the regular model of the Regnum RG6V makes it quite a compelling choice considering what you get in return. It really checked most of the right marks for this price point. This is definitely going to make it competitive on the chassis market, which is at the moment a bit overwhelming to be honest. There's a lot to choose from. I will probably take a look at some of their other chassis soon, as they have a very appealing philosophy and approach to their products, and they also have a lot of new interesting models like this SG7V. Leave a comment down below if you want to see it in action. That's it for this time from me. Thank you once again for watching. Please take a second to toss me a thumbs up if you enjoyed my content. That really helps a lot. And if you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe. And if you already are, be sure to press that notification bell down below so you don't miss out on a new video. And until then, catch you later, guys.